is Jason Higgins, and I'm an intern with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. I'm in Stillwater at the OSU Library to interview Thomas Yant to discuss his experiences as a Navy Seabee during the Vietnam War. This is part of the Spotlighting Oklahoma Oral History Project. Mr. Yant, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Let's begin with when and where you were born.
I was born in Ponca City, Oklahoma in 1944, September 7th, 1944.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about your parents.
My father was a manager of the Western Union office in Ponca City. He was also a realtor on the side, and he had established a laundromat in Ponca City, which my family ran. My mother worked at the laundromat. She was also a seamstress and a housekeeper.
Okay, and do you have brothers or sisters?
Yes, I've got a brother who is 3 years younger than I am.
Okay. Did you pick on your little brother growing up at all?
Of course.
Tell me a little bit about Ponca City growing up during that era.
Ponca City was mainly a Conoco town, and a big part of the population worked at Conoco. And well, they had at that time they advertised having around 3,000 employees, just Conoco. And but it was a nice town, and had a lot of good friends and pretty good schools, I think.
And what did you do for fun growing up? Were you involved in Boy Scouts or sports at all?
Oh, no, not really. I spent most of my time working at the family laundry, and for fun, we went fishing and shooting, swimming.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about school. Did you have any favorite subjects or anything?
Oh, not particularly. I had one government subject that I did fairly well in. I was kind of proud of and enjoyed it. But overall, there's nothing particularly stands out other than that.
Was Ponca City High a large school?
Yes, it was. I think there was around close to 500 in our graduating class, I believe.
Tell me a little bit about going through high school during a lot of the Cold War era. Do you recall a lot of the Kennedy speeches during that time or anything of that nature?
Not so much. I recall him, of course, running for president. I wasn't that much interested in politics at that time. Of course, I recall the Cold War tensions and all. And of course, the Cuban Missile Crisis that came later. But at the time I was in high school, that was pretty far from my mind.
Were there any nuclear drills or anything like that in school?
In grade school, we had some. To get under the desk or go to the halls, for different things.
Okay.
And people in the 1950s built storm shelters, not storm shelters, they were actually fallout shelters at that time. They were good for avoiding tornadoes too, but the sales pitch was for atomic attack. And they were all looked pretty much like little round dome-shaped shelters that people put in their backyards. We didn't have one, but a lot of folks did.
And were there any tornadoes in the area of Ponca City growing up?
Yeah, and I believe it was 1953. It was a tornado. It didn't come through Ponca City, but it blew away the northeast part of Blackwell.
Wow.
Just 16 miles away. Probably about 12 miles as the crow flies.
Okay.
From Ponca City.
And did your parents ever encourage you to go to college or anything of that nature?
They did. They didn't push it particularly, but they did encourage it. And I wanted to go to get some kind of education. And so I considered going to NOC. I didn't really consider OSU because it was so big. And of course it's big now, but it was big back then too. And I went to smaller school. I feel might be more comfortable in.
I see.
And I wound up going to a small church-related school up in Emporia, Kansas,
Hmm.
College of Emporia, which is closed in about 1971 or 2. But I went one semester up there and didn't do particularly well, and so I left. But it was a good experience. I made some good friends, friends that I've recently made new contact with. That across the hall from me was from Cyprus, and he came home from with me on the train at Thanksgiving in 1962, and spent the weekend with us. And then after I left school up there, we lost contact. And a year or 2 ago, actually it was just a little over a year ago, I guess, I found him by way of the internet. And wrote to him, and we established contact, and last September my wife and I went and visited with he and his wife in Cincinnati, Ohio. It was a real nice time.
Wow. So after Emporia, did you go to any further education?
Yeah, when I left Emporia, I was kind of at odds as to what to do. I went to work with my dad at the Western Union in Ponca City, just delivering messages for a little while, just to kind of fill in until I decided what I wanted to do. And he had literature there, the company literature about the microwave business. And microwaves were becoming a big thing back then, and I was reading about that. And I had a friend going to Okmulgee, to Oklahoma State Tech, it was called back then in Okmulgee. And I checked, they had a program in electronics, and I got interested in that. And so I enrolled over there and finished a 2-year program. I couldn't keep up with the math for the electronic program, so I went to the electrical maintenance program in industrial electrical maintenance, and I got a certificate in that. I got 2 certificates in electrical maintenance over there and graduated in 1965.
And were you a bachelor during this time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course I knew I was living under the threat of the draft, and the only thing keeping me out of the draft was going to school. And so when I left school there, I got a job with Ross and Purina Company in Fort Worth. And of course, being an electrician, I expected to do electrical work. And it was a non-union company down there, and there wasn't a lot of electrical work to do at that time, so I did mostly just grunt work, labor, and didn't do any electrical work at all. And after about 3 or 4 weeks of that, I decided that I might as well go ahead and join the military and get it over with. So I went back to Ponca City and joined the Navy.
So you volunteered for the Navy?
I volunteered for the Navy, and went back to finish up last week at work in Fort Worth, and while I was there I got my draft notice. So I just avoided the draft by just a few days. And so, but yeah, I went back to Ponca City and signed up, and was sent to boot camp in San Diego. And when classification day came, I was unsure as to what I was going to do. I kind of thought I might be an electrician on the ship or something, electrician's mate or something like that. The guy asked me if I thought about the Seabees, and he said if I wanted to join the Seabees, why, he could give me a bump in rate. I'd go from an E1 to an E3 and avoid, an E2 rating. It'd be a bump in pay grade. So I decided that sounded pretty good, so that's what I did. So I joined the Seabees and was sent to Fort Hueneme, California, which I was assigned to MCB 10, which is Mobile Construction Battalion, and sent to California to Fort Hueneme, and we did some training there. Did some, had to do various things, pole climbing, and radio communications. Some of us had to operate radios, and so I went through communications training and learned how kind of a shorthand for take communications on radio and telephone. Learned how to use the telephone system and whatnot. And all the electronics at that time, radio and telephone was mostly all left over from Korea and World War II. So it was all that era equipment.
All right. Tell me a little bit about basic training. What was emphasized during that time?
Basic training was mostly classes. We had some drill work. And they had issued us rifles that didn't have firing pins in them, and just for drill training. And we also had calisthenics. But we also did things like we had fire training, and that was a day or two of pretty intense fire training, which we didn't have any protective gear at that time, breathing apparatus or anything. They had mock ship compartments that they would flood with fuel and then set it on fire, and we had to go in and fight the fire. But that was pretty extensive training, and outside using foam on the fires that might occur, like on an aircraft carrier or something, fires out in a tank or on a deck. And then we went to the firing range and fire. But a lot of it was classroom training too. They had a mock ship, and we went on the shipboard and went through different drills that they have on the ship. But that's basically what it was about. It was a lot of shoe shining and washing our clothes. We had concrete tables out on a lot that we used whisk detergent and a scrub brush to wash our clothes and hang them on the clothesline with ties. We had little cords that we tied our clothes to the clothesline every night. And then we all had to take turns standing watch in the barracks and around the camp, around the base. Spent watch inside and outside, and one night I spent watch at the brig. But that was basically it. A lot of yelling.
During your time training as a Seabee, how, in your mind, what was the probability that you were going to Vietnam?
It was 100%, because the battalion I joined had just got back from there. They were the MCB 10 was the first battalion in Vietnam, and they made a beach landing at Chu Lai in 1966 and established an airfield there. And that was really early in the war. And when they got back from Chu Lai in December, that's when I joined them. Actually, I joined them in January, right after New Year's Day in January. But they had just gotten back in December, and they were. The Seabees would go over. They'd spend 8 or 9 months there, and then come back and regroup, get new equipment, retrain, get new people, and tell people to leave, and then they go back.
How did you prepare mentally for going to Vietnam?
I don't know. It was not knowing what we were getting into. Some of the other guys had already been there. My first time, I really didn't know what to expect too much. And it turns out my tour was pretty easy. But going in there, we had no idea what to expect.
Did you communicate with your family during that time before you deployed?
Oh yeah, telephone. Sure did.
How did your family react to the possibility?
Well, they knew where I was going. And they were devastated by it, but there was no choice. It never occurred to me to skip out and go to Canada or something, try to avoid it.
Right.
And it was just something that I felt like I needed to do to serve my country. Everybody did it back then, and I felt like I needed to be a part of that.
How did you get to Vietnam?
We left in flights out of Point Magoo, a naval air station, on C-141s.
Okay.
Flew over on C-141s. My flight, we took off and flew, and we got about halfway there or so. I don't recall how far it was, how long it was, but they had communication that it was storming really bad in Da Nang, and they stopped on Wake Island in the middle of the night, and I don't know if they had to. I don't think they had to refuel because those planes could fly across the Pacific without refueling. We stopped on Wake Island and spent a couple of hours in the night, reloaded, and then they flew us to Yokota, Japan. We got to Yokota about daybreak, and had breakfast at the Air Force Base there, and then reloaded and flew into Da Nang Airfield.
What were your impressions upon arriving in Da Nang?
It had been raining, and it was wet, humid. Don't recall it being overbearingly hot because it was still fairly early in the morning. But they loaded us on cattle trucks and took us to our camp, which was Camp Hoover. And it was located at the base of Hill 327.
Okay.
And we got there. We were assigned our quarters, and our tents were, we had strong back tents at that time, with canvas covers on them. And we were there for a couple of days, and then on the next weekend, we put galvanized metal roofs on the huts. Made huts out of them. They had they were built up off the ground, and with screen wire all the way around them, and did that metal roof. And I had flaps to put down during the rainstorms.
What were your assignments?
My assignment was in Port Hueneme, I was assigned to a Bravo company. When I got to Vietnam, they reassigned me to headquarters company, an S2 division, and put me in communications. My main job was in command post bunker, which is an underground bunker, and working telephone, switchboard, and radio, making announcements on camp. We had a PA system in camp and made announcements, and but mainly radio and telephone communications. And we worked 6 on, 12 off in the bunker, and through a few shifts, and then we'd have a few days on topside, working topside, stringing wire, fixing problems with the telephone lines topside. So, and that meant climbing poles and climbing through concertina wire. We had wires that ran across the camp on telephone poles, on the concrete poles. But when we got to the edge of the camp, it ran down through the concertina wire from one post to the next, outpost. And we had bunkers on the edge of the camp, and they all had sound-powered phones in them. And we communicated back and forth then by telephone.
What did you guys do during your time off?
Time off, we had an enlisted men's club there. It was built, it was a bamboo building with a thatch roof on it, and served beer, and they had slot machines in there. People would sit around and talk. Okay. Some people played the slots the whole time. I never put a nickel in it, but we just sit around and drink beer, and had movies. And the only movie that I remember seeing over there was a made for TV war movies. But, combat. It was a combat series, was big back then, and they showed those movies. But we sat there, and it was outside. When it was raining, well, we'd put the flap up on the tent and put our chairs under the tent flap, and with our back to the to the hooch, and watch the movie on the side of the building.
Did you interact with civilians during your time in Vietnam at all?
Very low. No, I didn't. We had a very few civilians in camp. There were a few Vietnamese civilians that worked in camp, and I had very little contact with civilians.
What were your impressions of the ones you did have contact with, as far as their standard of living?
They were just there doing a job, and like I say, I had very little contact with them, and I really don't have too much to say about them because I just didn't have that much interaction with them.
Okay. So tell me about a typical day on the job.
Well, it's like I say, it was 6 on, 12 off, and so you eat and go to the bunker and man the telephones and any radio communications that had to be made. We made those to various places. It was just it was kind of, the bunker became rat infested, and roaches, and a lot of big roaches in there and rats, but you get to where you ignore them and go on, and felt pretty secure in the bunker, working in the bunker, but when time came to work topside, by then, of course, we were climbing poles, and we were targets for whoever wanted to make us a target on our poles, but that was part of the job. I never got shot at or anything.
Was there a fear of snipers or mortar attacks?
There was some, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was some pretty hot activity in our area, but it wasn't so close to us that we had to be, that we had our firearms with us. We were issued M14. That's what we trained with M14 before we went over. And we had M14s, but we never had to get them out and arm ourselves. The only shot I heard fired over there was one of the guys came in drunk one night and hooch across from us and loaded and fired a round or two through the overhead in camp. And that was our own guys. Of course, it scared everybody, thinking there might be something going on, but it didn't take long to find out it was just a drunk in camp. But we didn't have anything that would really make us fearful in camp most of the time. It was just, we were pretty laid back. But there were things going on, and there was about a month there. I don't recall now what it was. It was in November or December. But there was about a month there that there was a lot of activity in our area, and they sent aircraft flying. There was seemed like it was a rice field or something between our camp and Da Nang. I don't know, it must have been 2 or 3 miles to Da Nang from where we were. And for about a month, every night at dusk, they started dropping flares over that area. And the aircraft would just fly slow over that area, shooting flares out, and they would parachute down and kept the whole area lit up for about a month. So, and you could read a newspaper out there at night. The flares, there were so many flares. And it was kind of fun to sit out there and watch the flares come down, and of course hoping that there's that they don't find somebody out there, but if there's somebody out there, we did want to find them. But it was kind of fun to sit out there and watch the flares float down and watch the patterns that they make as they floated down and the shadows. It was kind of eerie feeling, but it was kind of pretty too.
It seems like that it would be hard to sleep.
Well, no, you get to where you can sleep through about anything, especially when you have a tin roof and when the rains come, why it beats down on it. But after a while, you get to you can sleep through about anything.
How was sanitation during that time on camp?
It was good. When we first got there, we had they had a kind of a wooden bridge built across the creek that ran through camp, and had a shower set up on that. And then they built later, a little bit later, they closed in showers, and they had toilets with they used half of a 55-gallon drum, put diesel fuel in it, and they put, it seemed like there's about 6 or 8 holes in each toilet, put these drums under there. That's what she used. And then every morning, while there'd be a crew, honey bucket crew, they'd have to go out and pull them out, and they'd stack those buckets up and burn them, and replace them.
Were you on?
It was sanitary.
Oh, okay. Were you on that camp your entire stay during Vietnam?
Yeah, I was. I left one time to go to a beach party. We had a beach party. Went down to the beach and spent a Sunday afternoon at the beach. But other than that, that was pretty much it. While I was there, one of my friends had wintered over in Antarctica. And he was telling tales about that. And I thought, well, that sounds better than Vietnam. And so I applied to winter over in Antarctica, put in the paperwork for it. And they called me, and I went down to the road. The 3rd Marine Division was down the road from us at that time. They eventually moved out. The 1st Marine came in. But I went down to their Charlie Medical Battalion and got a physical and all that. And did everything I had to do to apply for it, but I didn't get accepted. And so I went back about my business, and I got to writing letters to my girlfriend that I had back home earlier. We got to writing back and forth, and eventually decided through letters that we'd get married when I got back. And so that was kind of nice. So when we did get back, when I got married. So
you proposed to a letter?
Through a letter, yeah.
How long did it take to get your reply?
I don't recall offhand. It just, the letters came and went pretty good. It seemed like the mail took about a week. So
it seems
maybe
like
it might have been 10 days. Part of the delay in the reply was her mother didn't like me anymore. After we'd broken up before, and her mother didn't want to give her the letter. She kept the letter from her for a couple of days before she finally gave it to her. But I got a positive response from her. She accepted, and so that gave me something to look forward to when we got home.
Tell me a little bit about the beach party, because I've heard of them and I've read of them.
We just swam. They just took some grills out there and charcoal steaks. We had steaks. We ate really, really well in the Seabees at our base, and they fed us really good. And every Sunday we had steaks. And every Sunday they barbecued steaks in camp. But this particular Sunday, while they moved the charcoalers out there, and we went to the beach and had our steaks and beer party and swam in the ocean. And that's about all it amounted to.
You hear a lot of associations with Vietnam, especially in the rear areas, with a lot of drug use. Did you ever experience that?
No, I didn't. Of course, I was over there early enough. That didn't get. I don't know that got to be such a big deal until later in the '60s.
Okay.
But I didn't know anybody that did drugs. We all smoked. Everybody smoked. And if anybody was smoking marijuana, I had no clue.
So at what point did you realize of the anti-war demonstrations back home?
Well, while I was there, it wasn't. I don't recall it being so much. Of course, back then there was so much going on back here anyway. Other than AntiWar, there was desegregation, and there was all that mixed in with it.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to sort it all out. But I took a paper from my hometown, from Ponca City News, sent me papers over there, and I'd get papers, and so. But I don't recall it being that big a deal in my mind at that time. My main concern was getting my tour done and getting home safe.
Absolutely. So, was there any unrest while you're in Vietnam as far as civil rights? Were there any? I realize it was a little early for the Black Power movement, but did you integrate well with African American soldiers in the Seabees?
I don't recall there being any problem in our group. I really don't. There weren't that many black Seabees there. There were some, but and we didn't have any in our hooch. There's about 10 to a hooch. But I don't recall there being any problem with them. I've never had any problems with it.
So how long were you in Vietnam?
I was there from May of '66 to the last day. It was about the last day of January of '67.
Okay. Was there any memorable episodes? Anything you want to share? Any day that was funny or anything like that?
No, not particularly. We just worked hard all the time. It was 6 on, 12 off. You kind of lose track of the days, and you know, there's times when we work around the clock. We decided to rewire the camp, and we worked around the clock for about 3 days doing that.
Did you get paid extra for being in a combat area?
Yeah, we got combat pay. Okay. Yeah, and there was obvious things going on. We had one of the things we did in the bunker when we were on duty was to call out the mortar crews. And when the Marines found something going on out there and they needed elimination, well, they called us, and then we provided elimination for them. Our mortar crews would go out and shoot mortar shells with elimination out over the areas that the Marines wanted. And that happened nearly every night. And so it was just, you know, it was that close to us. And we were sitting in the EM club, the Hill 327 right here, and there was a hot missile site on top of it. And there were times when there would be cannon fire, and we could hear rounds going over. You know, from one area to the other, right over us. You could hear them going over, but we weren't the targets. Yeah.
It seems that kind of atmosphere could lead to a lot of anxiety. Could you speak to that?
It could, you know. Of course, there was anxiety, I suppose, but we stayed busy, and that's the way we worked through it, just staying busy.
Okay.
Working 6 on, 12 off, where you don't have much time for anything else. You get a little bit of time for yourself. Go drink some beer, you know, and watch a movie and whatnot, and write letters. But we stayed pretty busy.
Did you carry any good luck charms or anything like that?
No. Well, our pastor in Ponca City gave me a little cross, Celtic cross. You know, I wore that on my dog tags.
Okay.
That's all I had.
So tell me about coming back home. How did you arrive in the United States?
So we came back on C-141, nonstop flight from Da Nang to back to California, and Ponca City Naval Air Station, and we landed there. And Fort Winnie's just right close by there, and we trucked over to bussed over to Fort Winnie and checked our guns in, and I recall it was a day or two. We had to do some administrative work there, I guess. And I don't recall exactly what all we did do before they turned us loose, and then they gave us a 30-day leave.
And what did you do?
I went home, and parents and future wife met me at the airport in Oklahoma City.
Okay.
And we drove to Ponca City, and by a week later, we were married.
Where did you get married?
We got married at the Presbyterian Church in Ponca City.
And did you go on a honeymoon?
We went on a short honeymoon. We went down to North Texas and visited some of my relatives down there. We went down into mid-Texas and back. Yeah.
And after your 30 days, you rejoined the Seabees?
Well, yeah, I sure did. In fact, so my wife was off. She had about a week or so off for getting married and honeymoon. She had to go back to work. She worked at Conoco,
Okay.
and she was a key lunch operator at Conoco. And so I had 2 or 3 weeks there to kill on my folks, and we had time after she got off work, and then had some time with my folks and whatnot. But yeah, at the end of the 30 days, I went back to Fort Winnie. We started regrouping, getting ready to go back to Vietnam. And while I was there, I got orders to to another base and to a naval communication station in Australia. And it was orders that I could accept or not. And if I accepted it, I could accept it as an 18-month single tour, unaccompanied tour, or I could take my wife and it would be a 24-month tour. And so I called her and asked her if she was interested, and she said, sure, anything. Of course, I was interested. If I didn't have to go back to Vietnam, that sounded pretty good to me, but I didn't want to necessarily go over there without her for 18 months. And she had never been away from home. So that was on the other side of the world, you know, her first time away from home. But she was game and said she wanted to do it. So they cut me orders for a leave. I got another 30-day leave to get ready to go to Australia. And went on and we applied for a passport, which didn't come in time. But we made our preparations, and time came. We bought a new car, and I drove the car to Travis Air Force Base. Actually, I drove the car somewhere there in Oakland. I forgot where it was for shipping, and then went to Travis Air Force Base. I may have turned it in to Travis. I don't recall offhand, but they shipped the car over there for us. And at Travis, I spent the night, and then they loaded me on a C-124, and for a flight to Australia. And it was about a 10-hour flight. It was a prop plane. It flies just under 300 miles an hour. There was a long flight to Hawaii. We landed at Higgins Air Force Base and had a 15-hour crew rest there. And then we got back on it, and they had taken some of the passengers off, and they were retired people and other passengers on there. We just had jump seats. It's a cargo plane. All we had was the jump seats up down the sides, and the cargo down the middle. And they'd taken some of the passengers off and put a cargo of liquid oxygen on board. And we took off and got about 30 minutes out and had an engine quit. So we came back, and they spent another 15 hours while they put another engine on the plane. And when they did that, they took the liquid oxygen off. I don't know if they went ahead and sent it on another plane or what. But then they put those passengers back on. So anyway, we took off again and flew to Ponca and had a 15-hour crew rest there. Saw a little bit of Ponca, and had a hotel there and got a few hours sleep. Then from there we flew to Christchurch, New Zealand, and we had another crew rest there. Spent some time in New Zealand. I'd met one of the people on the plane was a teacher who had actually been to Ponca City, and I think his name was Jim Shape, and he had been a teacher, and he was retired from the military, taking the hop, and so we walked around Christchurch and saw some of the sites in Christchurch, New Zealand. And he wanted to go to a school there, and so we went and visited the school and got there at tea time. And you know, at that time, Christchurch, they said New Zealand was more British than England was at that time. They had their high tea and all. But we got there in time for tea and had a nice visit with the faculty of this school, and went back and spent a little time in the pub and got a couple hours of sleep, and then got back on the plane and flew to New Zealand. I flew to Australia from Christchurch, New Zealand. And I don't recall how long that flight was. Pretty long flight too, but it wasn't as long as the others. But we landed in Richmond, Australia, at Royal Air Force Base there, and I asked around there, and they had no idea how I was going to get to where I was going. And my duty station was on Northwest Cape, Australia, which is a little cape of land sticks out in the Indian Ocean. It was a very low frequency. It was a communication station. They had a very low frequency transmitter there to transmit to the subs, and subs could receive underwater the very low frequency transmissions. So, but it was located in Exmouth, Northwest Cape, and they had no idea how I was going to get there. And I don't think they'd even heard of it, if I recall correctly. And so they suggested that what I need to do is go to Sydney to the American consulate. And so I grabbed a cab and he drove me. I don't know where all he took me, but finally got onto a train, and the train got me into downtown Sydney and come in the subway in Sydney. And got to Sydney right at noon, and the sidewalks were just full of people. I mean, and it seemed like every direction I tried to go, they were going the other way. But anyway, I worked around, and after lunch, I didn't eat at that time. I wanted to wait, and I thought I'd just eat at the airport. And I got to the consulate, and they got me orders to Perth, and the airplane ticket to Perth. So I went to the airport and waited for my flight, and caught that plane to Perth. It was non-stop flight from Sydney to Perth, and got to Perth. They put the American consulate in Perth put me up in a hotel.
Did your wife
there.
join you the entire time?
No, she didn't have her passport yet.
Oh, okay.
It hadn't come yet. We had made a mistake of applying for a free passport, and that was the result of it. And so she was still working and waiting for her passport.
And were there other crewmen with you going to that next location?
While I was in the hotel there, I met one of the guys that had been a bunkmate in Vietnam, Rick Grenham, and he'd gotten orders there too, and we just run into each other. I had no idea, and one of the guys from the council house kind of showed us around, and we went around Perth, kind of bar hopped a little bit, and spent a day or two in Perth. Saw a movie, and then they sent us to Exmouth, and the flight was to Learmonth Air Force Base. It was a Royal Australian Air Force Base during World War II. It was just a tiny little strip out there with a couple of buildings around it, and it was about halfway down the Cape, and we landed at Learmonth, and there was nothing there. There was somebody there to meet me and meet us, and we flew up there in a DC-3. But we got taxied into Exmouth, and after that, it was pretty much kind of a blur. That's what happened then. I checked into the master at arms and got set up in berthing, and they showed me around. There were 3 areas there, well, 4 I guess, if you count downtown. But out on the tip of the peninsula was an antenna field, and this was Area A, and there were 13 antennas out there, and the center, the 12 were in a circle, and the center antenna was the tallest, at that time it was the tallest man-made structure in the southern hemisphere. I forgot how tall it was, but it was wild up there. And there was a large power plant there, and the VLF transmitting, that was the VLF transmitting site there. And then a few miles back was the base where we all lived, and the non-married people lived anyway, and the base. And then a couple of miles on back up the Cape from the base was the town of Exmouth, which is a small little town. It was just kind of coming into being at that time. They had all new houses and everything. This whole thing had just been completed. The entire station had just been completed. And it seemed like it was between the base and town. There was a high frequency transmitter site. They had their antennas and their transmitter was there. And then from on inland from town, it was about 35 miles inland to where I worked was area, they called Area C, and it was a high frequency receiver site. And we had a large antenna field out there also, all in a circle with fire breaks around it. And in the center of that was the receiver building, and then we had a power plant, which was where I was operating. I was to operate. And we had 475 kilowatt diesel generators in there, and then a water treatment plant was close by. We operated a water treatment plant for that area. Had a couple of water wells there. We drew our own water and treated it and stored it for the site. And we had the power plant, of course, had large storage for diesel fuel for the power plant. And it was all brand new. And when I was taken out there, and the contractor was still there, and he went over it with us and showed us how everything worked. And all the plans were still there and everything. And in a short time, they turned it over to us. And we took shifts working at that power plant, keeping the power going for the receiver site.
Tell me a little bit about the community with your wife and the others living on base.
Yeah, after a few weeks when my wife arrived, she got her worse. And, it was kind of nice that in the communication there, my father being the manager of the Western Union in Ponca City, he got all of his telegrams free. And we could send them free to him. And so we had that communication. It was kind of nice to be able to just send wires back and forth. And he told me that she was kind of kept me updated on her status and then when she was coming. But the day she arrived was kind of a surprise. I was expecting her to be there the next day, and she got there a day early. But she arrived in Perth, and there was a delay in her flight. I guess it wasn't supposed to be in for another day, and somehow the seat opened up and they got put her on it, and she arrived. And I was there on base doing something, I recall now, and they called and said she was down at the bus station. It was kind of a bus station there. It was, seemed like there was a weekly bus or something that came. But from the Cape to Perth was 800 miles. So we were way out. Mm-hmm. And the last 90 miles from the Cape, from I think down that coast was I think Geraldton came first, and then from Perth on north was Geraldton, and then Carnarvon, and then Exmouth. And the last 90 miles to the Cape was dirt road.
How many other families were living on base?
Well, the families, married housing was in town in Exmouth.
Oh, okay. And
it was military built the housing, but that's where the married company housing was. And so we lived in town. On the base, there were barracks there, and I don't recall how many people were there. In town, there was, I think the whole place was less than 2,500 of us.
Did your wife?
Less than 2,000.
I'm sorry. Did your wife take an employment in the town?
No, she didn't. She kept house. We had no telephone, no television out there because it just wasn't. There weren't any. It just wasn't any. I had a radio that I bought in Vietnam that had a shortwave band on it, and we could get a little bit of shortwave that way sometimes. And we listened to the moon landing on it. And but she was housekeeper. The house that we were assigned was a brand new house that had never been lived in, and had Danish modern furniture in it, 2 bedrooms, and washer and dryer, some front line Westinghouse washer and dryer, and electric range. And it was a concrete block house with an air conditioner on top of it. It had a concrete roof on it. It was supposed to be hurricane proof. The only problem with that was that it was built right down on the ground. It wasn't built up where water couldn't come in the front door, but it was built to be hurricane proof. It had shutters on the windows, and it was a nice house. And but the summers were really hot. It was one day I was out mowing and stopped to rest and looked at the thermometer. It was 117 degrees in the shade.
Wow.
And of course, that was probably in December or January down there, because it's being down there. The seasons are opposite what they are up here. But the yard was just all bare pin dam, they call it, soil pin dam. It's just a gritty dirt that compacts into kind of clay. And we had to put in a lawn, and managed to get a little bit of a lawn made. So I did borrow a mower from the push mower from the military and mowed the yard once in a while. But she had worked all of her life and had not much experience cooking or anything in housekeeping. And so that gave her opportunity to do it. And so she made friends with all the ladies around there, and they kind of leaned on each other. She kind of kept the same hours that I did. Down there I worked 12 hours, 12 on, 24 off for 3 shifts, and then I got 3 days off. But she kept the same hours that I did. And of course, I had to leave a little early. It was a long drive out to Area C, about a 35-mile drive, and the speed limit was 35 miles an hour. And so, but she baked all of her bread. When I got down there, it was kind of a shock. The store was just down the street, and I walked down there and bought some supplies, and went to check out, and they checked it all out and wanted to be paid, and I said, well, do you have a sack or something, put this in? He said, no, you have to bring your own. So, you know, being a spoiled American, I wasn't used to that.
Right.
I learned, they gave me a box to put the stuff in, and we learned to take our own sack to the grocery store. But they had a meat market there, and several different stores. And she learned to do business as an Aussie and buy meat at the meat market. And she learned how to order cuts of meat and whatnot. The first time she went in and asked for a ham, he brought out a whole leg, and it still had the hair on it.
So what did you guys do for fun with no TV and?
Well, we played a lot. Linda and I played a lot of cards, but we went for walks and visited with the neighbors. They eventually put in the Aussies put in a drive-in movie, and we went to the drive-in movie once a week. And she made all of our bread. We got a little charcoaler, and we charcoal hamburgers and whatnot, packaged them up, and took them into the drive-in with us.
Sounds like a home away from home.
Yeah, it was pretty nice, really. And you know, there, like anywhere in the Navy, one day runs into the next. You get into your routine, and one day runs into the next, and time passes.
How long were you there?
And we were there for 2 years. I got there in June of 1967, and we left in September of 1969.
At what point did you have your daughter?
She came much later after
okay.
I got back to the States. We'd been married 9 years when Ann came along.
Okay.
So yeah, we'd gotten back to the States, and I was out of the service. Service was history then.
Okay. So during your 2 years there, after your 2 years there, was your enlistment up, or?
Yeah, actually, I think that the fact that I got orders to Australia to begin with is probably an error, because I I had applied to winter over at a remote duty station in Arctic, and didn't get accepted for that. And I think my name got floated for remote duty, and somehow I got orders to a remote duty station in Australia, and which turned out to be good for me and for both of us. But after we'd been there 18 months, all of a sudden I got orders back to Vietnam, back to battalion. And that was just out of the blue. It just hit me like a ton of rocks. And so I went to personnel, checked it out, pointed out the fact that I was there on a 24-month company tour. And that also, by that time, my brother was in Vietnam. And so I pointed that out to him. At that time, if the family wished, they could only have one. The military would only have one sibling in a war zone.
What branch was your brother in?
He was in the Navy.
Okay.
He was at Cameron Bay. He was a naval airman. And, he was an enlisted man also, but he was in Cameron Bay. So anyway, with all that, I got to continue my tour and complete my 24-month tour.
Okay.
In Australia, and at the end of my tour there, I went back to Port Hueneme. Linda, we flew together to Los Angeles, and she came on home, and I went on up to Port Hueneme and got discharged. Well, I actually went to inactive reserve. At that time, you had a 6-year tour, 4 years of active and 2 years inactive.
Okay.
And so I went up there and got my discharge, and flew back to Ponca City.
Did you ever discuss politics with the other enlisted men at any time?
Some, it's all pretty vague right now. We had a lot of time together out there. Where we were at, a lot of times it was just me out there. During the daytime, there were usually two of us Seabees in the power plant working. We had time to visit and whatnot, but we visited some, and we had magazines, and we got news. Most of the news we got down there was a week or two old. Magazines and whatnot were a couple of weeks old by the time we got them, and the mail was slow. But we talked a little bit of politics, and at that time I was Republican. My father was a Democrat, and I don't know if I became a Republican because he was a Democrat. Well, Republicans supposedly were conservative people, and I felt like I was a conservative, and I felt like that pretty well described me.
How did you feel about Nixon?
I came to change my mind later on, but no, he wasn't too happy that I was the Republican, but that's the way I voted.
So you're a Nixon supporter?
Excuse me?
You were a Nixon supporter at the time?
At that time, yeah, I supported Republicans. And, but later I came to see that, the good that Johnson did when we got the health care for the Medicare, pushed through the Medicare, and that was, right now I'm pretty glad to have it.
A great society, yeah.
Yeah, but he did a lot to desegregation. He did a lot for desegregation, and I admire him for that. I don't admire him for keeping the war in Vietnam going. Looking back at the time I was there, I felt like that I need to be there because that's where I was supposed to be at that time. But I didn't necessarily agree. I didn't really understand it. And I don't think very many of us over there did understand why we were there. And knowing what we know now, I'm looking back, we never should have been there. And the same reason I feel like we never should have been in Iraq and did what we did in Iraq recently, but or even Afghanistan as far as that goes. But trying to change their cultures, there's no way we were going to change the culture in Vietnam, South Vietnam. But that was kind of my stance. But I felt like he was doing what he felt like he had to do, and he was my commander-in-chief, and so I followed orders like everybody else did.
Absolutely. So after you got back to the United States, Vietnam was becoming increasingly unpopular. Did you continue to associate yourself with Vietnam and the military during that time?
Well, I guess in my mind I did. Of course, I was pursuing a career outside the military then, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. But you have to understand, while we were in Australia, things that happened over here. Kennedy had already been assassinated, but then his brother got assassinated. Martin Luther King got assassinated while we were over there. And they were having all the riots and stuff going on over here. And of course, it was always a week or so late, the news getting to us. But boy, the way it sounded like America was going to hell in a handbasket. And you know, we thought several times that if it hadn't been for having parents here, we might not even got back. And we, you know, it was, of course, there was no question we were going to come back home. But we kind of got used to living in Australia. Of course, we weren't seeing the main part of Australia. We were in a remote part, but the way things were going back here, Australia sounded pretty nice.
Wow.
But no, once we got back, I didn't hear a lot of anti-Vietnam sentiment where we were. We came back to Ponca City, and I don't know, maybe I just wasn't paying attention to it or what, but we came back to Ponca City, and I was trying to decide what to do next. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go back to Okmulgee and go to school again and finish up that electronics certificate down there, and at least that would be a start. So we moved to Okmulgee, and I went to school down there for a month or two, and I got to talking to, the classroom just closed in on me. I just wasn't ready to be closed in at that time, because I'd been 2 years out in the outback, and the classroom just closed in on me, and I just couldn't get my head around it. And I started looking for other work. And so I talked to the head of the department, head of electronics department there. He and I were friends before, and I talked to him. He looked into a couple of options for me. There was a job opening in Tulsa with a company called Southwest Tube. They needed an industrial electrician. And then there was a job opening at a place in southeastern Oklahoma. He said, somewhere down south of Salisaw, he said. And it turned out to be Poto. And there was a company called Graphics Incorporated down there. And they made graphic panel boards from control centers for big companies like Johnson Controls and oil companies and whatnot, control centers. They had graphic illustrations on the front of it, just the processes that were going on, and valves and things, and switches and things on them. And that's what they did. So I went to Sand Springs and I interviewed with Southwest Tube, and it sounded pretty good, but we would have to live in Sand Springs or Tulsa. And I just wasn't ready for a big city. You know, I was ready for country. And after living in the country for that length of time, and I didn't want the city traffic, because where we had been, there'd been no traffic for 2 years. And you know, the worst traffic I got into was when I hit a kangaroo on the way to work one night. But so I just couldn't wrap my head around living in Tulsa, and so I applied. Interviewed for the job at Graphics Incorporated, and they were really friendly, and they seemed to have a good job for me. They offered me a good starting salary. It seemed like it was around $6,500 a year at that time, which to me was a lot of money then. And so I took the job in Poto.
Did your service make you marketable?
At that time, I don't know if it did or not. And it's not something that you couldn't just tell them that you was a veteran and get points for it at that time. So I don't know if it helped or not.
But as far as work experience,
the fact that I had the training at Okmulgee, and the electronics department had recommended me to these two companies, and with his recommendation, and a job interview too to find out what I knew, and so it worked out, and we moved to Poto and went to work as a process technician in the division that built motor control centers for industry. There was a part of the company that did some routine boxes that they built for Johnson Controls, and they're remote control centers and panels that were little extruded panels with the controls on them. They were kind of a cookie cutter, and they were kind of a routine part of the business. But our part, industrial, we quoted jobs for, the first job I got assigned to, and actually the only one I completed was for Mid-America Pipeline. And it was a control center. It was 13 foot long. It had a 3/16 inch aluminum steel face on it, brushed aluminum, and with graphic works with knobs and controls on the front of it, meters. And they had electrical wiring and pneumatic piping in them also. And but I was assigned that particular project going into it, and we had the drawings from Mid-America Pipeline, what they wanted, and then I had to take and make drawings, our shop drawings. And the only experience I had at drafting was in junior high and technical drawing, but I relied on that schooling, and I was able to do it and pull it off. And ordering, sending the parts list to purchasing for ordering. Well, the purchasing department was located in another part of town at that time, and in fact, we were located in another part of town. The manufacturing facility was in the north side of Poto, and our offices were downtown in an old jailhouse building, and it was a block building that nobody else wanted. But anyway, that's where our offices were at that time. And but we ordered the parts, sent our bills of material into the purchasing office, and they would order them, but they didn't have time for the follow-up that they needed. And so Ken asked me if I would be interested in doing expediting parts. So I expedited my own parts and expedited parts for that were going in on other projects we had going. There were a bunch of us in that group, and we had several different projects going at a time. Expedited parts for all, and finished my project, MAPCO project, and got it shipped. And about that time, one of the purchasing agents left, and he was the one that was doing the purchasing for our group. And he left the company, and so they asked me if I'd be interested in purchasing. And so I said, well, yeah, I'm expediting anyway. I'm talking to all the vendors. I might as well do the purchasing too. And so they worked me into the purchasing at that time, and that's where I first became involved in purchasing. And I purchased all the material for our jobs, for all the industrial jobs there. I worked there I went to work for them in the fall of 1969, and worked until April, I think it was April or May, I guess it was, of 1978 in their purchasing department there. And in the meantime, while I was there, it was pretty difficult work. And, a lot of pressure. And I started looking for something to occupy my time outside of the office. And I'd always wanted to fly, so I decided to take flying lessons. So I did that, learned how to fly. And then one thing led to another. By the time I got my private license, I thought, well, heck, maybe I'd want to fly for a living. And decided to take commercial, go for my commercial certificate. And so I commuted to Van Buren, Arkansas to take commercial pilot training in my off time. And I did that under the GI Bill.
Oh.
And that there was a college there in Poto that I could have taken classes, but I was more interested in flying at that time. So I used my GI Bill to get a commercial rating, and then once I got that, required 160 hours of flight time. And, the private required 40 hours, so there was 200 hours of flight time then. And then after that, I decided to get my instrument rating, and then multi-engine. Paid for all that with the GI Bill. And I was working on, I was going to get my instructor's certificate, and I was kind of getting burnt out at Johnson Controls because I couldn't see the future there for me. I'd been there for 8.5 years, and I couldn't see a future there for me. In fact, I guess I need to back up because graphics was bought out by Johnson Controls not long after I got there.
Oh, okay.
And the boss that I had that hired me, he got laid off, and there was several people got laid off, and there was kind of restructuring there. And the owner that had hired me, that owned the graphics, Mr. Gray, he retired. So there was kind of a change of personnel there. So for about the last 6 years there with Johnson Controls. And so I'd worked for Johnson Controls. And I couldn't see where in Poto there was any place for me to go. Johnson Controls home office was in Milwaukee, and I'd never even considered going to one of their other locations. You know, that's where I wanted to be in Poto, but it was kind of a dead end there. The other purchasing agent had been there longer than I had, and so he had seniority. He wasn't going anywhere. And I was kind of burnt out on what I was doing.
I understand.
But I guess what I need to do is back up a little bit. Part of what I was doing at that time, this was in the 70s, the nuclear power plant business was booming at that time. And so what I was doing was buying material for nuclear power plants. And we were building consoles for nuclear power plants. It required kind of a whole other mindset to the other stuff that we were doing for oil companies and chemical companies. And everything had to be in-stamped and had certificates of compliance and all that. So it was a whole other ballgame than what it had been. And I got pretty good at it, you know, but I just felt like I need to start thinking a little further down the line of where I was going to be, you know, in 10 years. You know, well, I'd had all this flight training, maybe I could use that and build on that. So and by that time my daughter had come. I started flying in '74, she came in '76. And this was '78, and I went ahead and gave him my resignation, and we moved to Stillwater. And I went to started school here in the technical education, and I was taking some flight training as a flight instructor, and to be a flight instructor. And here, and plus I was also taking classes to help me toward a degree. And but when I got my flight instructor certificate, then I started working on the instrument certificate, instrument instructor. And I went to work part-time for Universal Aviation here in Stillwater, and doing some flight instructing for them, and did a couple of charter flights for them. And I liked it. And so I visited the airport in Ponca City, and they were needing pilots. And so I thought, well, maybe I could get started up there as a pilot. And so we moved to Ponca City, and I finished the semester here in '78 and moved to Ponca City at the end of that semester. And what I didn't realize, I didn't know that much about the business. The way they hire pilots, at that time anyway, for a Part 135 operation with a charter and instructor, the pilot gets to come in and take up space, and if they have a student or if they have a flight, they get paid. Otherwise, they don't get paid. Well, this was in December of 1978, and it was a bad winter. And I had several students. I had quite a few students that would come, and I'd take them, but there weren't very many charter flights. And what flights I did get, a lot of them wound up flying in ice in aircraft that weren't certified for ice, and it was pretty risky. And I didn't have any insurance to speak of. I had a little bit of life insurance, but not near enough for what I needed. And no liability insurance to cover me. And I don't know if the operator, fixed base operator, did or not. I assume that he did. But I felt my family was pretty vulnerable. We didn't have any health insurance, anything. So I left my family pretty vulnerable. So after a few weeks of that, and bad weather and risky flights, I did finish up my instrument instructor certificate. I got certified to be an instrument instructor and did a little bit of that too, and started on multi-engine instruction. In fact, I flew one of the airplanes down as an old Piper Apache down to Oklahoma City for my check ride for a multi-engine instructor. Certificate, got down there and got the FAA certification pilot in there and went and started it up and didn't have oil pressure on one engine. And so that blew that. And so I got out of the airplane and I called them and told them what I had, that it was down, and I told them, I need to get home. I want to go home. And I've got, by that time I had taken a job at Wellborn Electric in Ponca City. And I was working 8 hours a day there and then flight instructing in the evening. And I needed to get home for the next day's work. And I said, at the end of the day, tomorrow, I'll come back and get the airplane and bring it back to Ponca. Well, by the end of the day, the next day, they'd already sent somebody after it. And there was some ill will between me and the owner of the place over that deal. And we had another problem too, and I'd flown a flight into Wichita for them, and in icing conditions, instrument icing conditions, and landed at the airport up there with a big load of ice on that airplane. They wanted me to fly it back, and I wouldn't do it because of the icing conditions. And so I wound up renting a car there and driving back to Ponca City. And so there was some hard feelings there. That there was a couple of other guys from the business was on the plane with me that time, and one of them flew it back. And but I never did find out the details of that. But flying in icing conditions and airplanes that aren't rated for it and aren't certified for icing, and in that particular airplane, the directional gyro didn't work properly. That's just a recipe for disaster. I wouldn't fly it. And so that and this other multi-engine deal, the owner of the company and I just got crosswise, and he he wouldn't call me when my students showed up. He'd give them to somebody else. And I'd go out there and I wouldn't have any students because he had already given them to somebody else. So I put in a day's work at the electrical shop and selling electrical supply, and then go out to the airport in the evening and not have any work. And so that didn't work too well. But I guess I need to back up. While we were in Poto, there was a company coming into Ponca City who had advertised in the paper that they were coming, Huffy Corporation. And they built bicycles. Their home office in Dayton, Ohio, that's where their manufacturing was. They'd advertised in the paper that they were coming to Ponca City. And I thought, that sounds kind of neat. You know, maybe I can get a job in Ponca City with them. This is when I was still with Johnson Controls. And so I sent them a resume, and nothing came of it. While we were living in Ponca City, it started coming about. They started building it out by the airport. And my wife was working as a temporary for a temp agency downtown, and Huffy needed somebody to do some work typing for them. And she, while she was there, she told them that she was talking to the personnel manager and wanted to know did they remember getting my resume. And so, no, they didn't. They wanted me to tell me just to apply again. And so I did. And while I was working with Wellborn Electric up there, while Huffy was building out west of town by the airport, and I was putting in my time down there and flight instructing in the evenings. Well, I went ahead and put in my resume and my application with Huffy, and in January of 1980 was accepted there as a purchasing agent. Brand new office, brand new facility, and that worked out really well. That was really great. And my wife didn't do any more work for him, but she kind of nudged him and was kind of a go-between for me to get me in the door there. And the guy she had talked to turned out to be personnel manager that I talked to, and it turns out my office backed onto his, and we became really good friends. And I worked for Huffy for 2.5 years there, and as they were growing and building bicycles, and they weren't making a profit yet, but they were increasing the efficiency, and it was coming. And the very month that we started making, I think they were trying to get a minimum of 1,500 bicycles a day built. About the time that they reached that goal, they decided to shut that place down in Ponca City. And I got laid off. And I was in one of the first groups. There was about 600 of us got laid off in one bunch there. And that was a hit because we'd rented a house there and didn't have any other insurance. They had their insurance, you know, and it lasted for a little bit. But my wife had gone to work for the church. She'd worked for several places around town, insurance office, and she'd gone to work for the church, and that was a hit. And but I sent out resumes, hundreds of resumes, and but one of the salespeople who owned a company here in town, here in Stillwater, Inman Corporation, was a fellow by the name of Bob Overton. He was a co-owner at Inman Corporation. And he called on me in Stillwater, trying to sell us, in Ponca City, called on me in Ponca City to sell me electrical supplies. And of course, they didn't have much that I could buy from them. They had some, but we became pretty good acquaintances. And so Bob was one of my, I guess network people that I turned to, and I sent him an application. And he had their manufacturing facility here. They were manufacturing equipment for the oil pipeline business, but they had a electrical supply business that was in support of that, but they were also selling electrical supplies around up northern Oklahoma. He hired me to be an outside salesman. They didn't have an outside salesman. Well, at that time, at the time that Huffy was starting to close down up there, was at the time of the bank in Oklahoma City collapsed, and the oil business was collapsing. We were going into a recession. You know, the salesman I'd had the office full of salesmen waiting to see me, sitting out there with gold chains around their necks, just trying to sell stuff, and all of a sudden they were gone. And there I was. I went to work as an outside salesman trying to sell at a time when nobody was buying. People were trying to reduce their inventories and just using what they had on hand. And I was out there trying to sell electrical supplies. I went all over northern Oklahoma, from O'Keene to Pryor to Shawnee, trying to sell electrical supplies. And I was the only salesman out there. And so that lasted for 9 months. And then that job went away. And so,
tell me about how you got the job at OSU.
well, that came somewhat later. I went on, drew unemployment compensation after I left in for 6 months. And eventually got on with the state central purchasing office, the Office of Public Affairs it was called that time, central purchasing in Oklahoma City. And so I commuted to Stillwater for 2.5 years down there. And I was a buyer for central purchasing. And one of the things I had to do there was to go to minority vendor fairs and such as that. And at those places I came across Ed Shreve, who was the owner of a new company coming into town here called Frontier Engineering. And he was a friend with Bob Overton. Bob Overton, when his company went down, he became one of the vice presidents in Frontier Engineering. And so I kind of kept in touch with Ed. You know, you need anybody in purchasing? No, not yet. You know, not that big yet. Kind of kept in touch with him for when he might need a purchasing agent. And so eventually, after 2.5 years, they did. And Frontier Engineering hired me. And so we were still living in Stillwater, and I'd been commuting to the city, so that was kind of nice. I went to work for them as a purchasing agent, and it kind of worked into a purchasing manager job for the company. Frontier Engineering turned out to be a large outfit. Eventually, they had offices in Washington D.C. and Fallon, Nevada, and Whidbey Island, Washington, and in Oklahoma City. They were a contractor for the FAA, and so I was buying supplies for projects they had going for them and for the Defense Department. Whidbey Island and Fallon, Nevada, those were for Top Gun School, and for Whidbey Island was a Naval Air Station. And they had government contracts. And so I learned, working for them, I took seminars and whatnot, learned how to do buying for government contracts, government purchasing. I had the bid experience from the state, and now I gained experience working with the federal government, working for the federal government as a contractor. buying with flow down clauses and whatnot that need to go into the contracts and whatnot. And so I got experience with them doing that. Plus I had a purchasing evolved, and I managed a purchasing department there. And I had several people working for me. And plus I was promulgating the purchasing policies for the other offices in the other parts of the country too, and doing some of their buying. And and that was a real challenge. And plus I got a lot of education. They helped me go to this, they paid for my seminars, and I went to Florida and to Arizona, and first one place another seminars learning about doing business for the government buying. And so I got a pretty good education in that there. And that lasted until 1991. They were having some problems meeting some of the government requirements as far as timesheets and whatnot, and the government was withholding some funds from them. And the business was owned by a man and his wife who were getting a divorce. And they decided at that time to dissolve the organization as it was and reorganize. And so I got laid off. The day I got laid off, they laid off 50 others. And the place started the reorganization. I got my notice on my birthday, September 7th, 1990, 1991, I guess it was. And so I went on unemployment again and used it up. I was unemployed for 6 months. And during that time, I had not become certified. I never had gotten a college degree. But I'd done all the work and got all the points I needed to get certified as a purchasing manager under the National Association of Purchasing Management. And I'd done all the work, but I just hadn't taken the time to go take the test and get certified. There's 3 tests to take. And so I took all the tests and got certified while I was off. And so I had that going for me. There's a CPM. That opened the door for me at the university. And I knew pretty much about what was going on at the university in purchasing because my wife had gone to work with the university in 1983. And she would, for the animal science department, and she did a lot of the buying for them, worked for the purchasing department, doing requisitions and whatnot. And so she interacted with the purchasing department here. And when she needed something, there were times that I could give her information that I had when I was working with the state that would help her out. That help her open doors for her in the purchasing department here at the university. Well, so I did have some experience that they could use with it. Turns out that the system that they were using in this purchasing department here was basically the same thing that we were doing in Oklahoma City when I worked for the state. And so my experience there opened doors for me. And I think by that time, the fact that I was a veteran also helped open that door. And but I had good references too. Everywhere I went, I got letters of reference, and they were all good. And I had good letters of reference. And so they did hire me. In the meantime, while I was waiting to hear from them, I didn't know if I was going to get on anywhere or not, and I had to do something. So I studied for a real estate license, and I got licensed as a realtor. And I sold one piece of property, and the day that property was supposed to close was the day that Fred Williamson called me from Pershing and wanted to interview me.
Okay.
And I had to ask him to delay my interview while I closed on the house. But after the closing, I went up and interviewed with Fred, and he did hire me. And I went to work here on April Fool's Day, 1992, and worked as a buyer here until I retired in 2010, October 2010.
What are some of your favorite memories of OSU?
Oh, I don't know. We did seminars, purchasing seminars for the different departments. The departments on campus would come a couple times a year to our seminars, and doing those was always nice. But I had commodities like the other buyers had, and I bought scientific equipment, instruments, equipment, electrical supplies, heating, air conditioning, and a lot of the stuff I had experience in. The scientific equipment I didn't, but the professors that had the requirements, a lot of the times, if they knew that I didn't know anything about it, they would give me a hard time. But when they found out that I was really there to try to help them, and that once they told me what they needed and why they needed it, how they needed it, that I could work the system for them and get it for them and cut red tape and could help them. And I became friends with a lot of the department heads and scientists here on campus, as well as other departments too, not just science department, but the other departments. I was able to help them too, and I was being able to help them do their job was good for me. You know, that was what I was here for. And it paid off. I became friends with a lot of people, and you know, I got experience buying from overseas. They put in a clean room here, and we bought a lot of equipment from overseas. And I got that experience, and I was able to help along the way, open doors for these professors that needed opening, and work with the customs, and I learned how to get stuff into the country and what it took to get things in free. I discovered there were ways to get things in duty free and how to do that, and work with professors to get their stuff in here in a timely manner and free, and that meant a lot to them, and it meant a lot to me too, because it opened doors for me. So it worked real well. I enjoyed it, but there's a lot of politics in buying for the university, because it's a public institution, and the politics is the downside, and trying to work around that.
Well, you grew up in Oklahoma, and though you went to Vietnam and Australia, you came back to Oklahoma. So my question is, what does Oklahoma mean to you?
Well, it's home. It really is. It's I couldn't really think about living anywhere else. I never could, really. We thought about living in Australia there for a while, you know, but after we got home, we were glad to be home. We were here to take care of our parents from their old age, and help them with their infirmities and bury them. And you know, they're buried here, and this is where our roots are. And I was born in Ponca City, and my wife was born in Durant, and she was raised in Ponca City, and we became friends at the age of, she was 14 and I was 15. And so we've known each other all this time, and this is home.
Before I ask my closing question, is there anything throughout this interview that you wanted to talk about that I haven't asked or hasn't come up yet?
No, we pretty well covered it, I think. I'm not sure what it would be.
Okay. Well, I have one more question other than this one, but were you exposed to Agent Orange during your time in Vietnam?
The area that I was in was. Personally, I was not, but having served in that area, that was the whole I-Corps area basically is now certified as Agent Orange. And we were west of Da Nang, and that whole area at one time or another was sprayed with Agent Orange.
Have you had any negative health consequences?
I've not had any myself, no. I did go down and take the Agent Orange physical, and and I don't know, something could come up later on it, but at this point I don't have any. My main concern, I smoked for a number of years, and that's on me.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was working for Inman, I got some asbestos exposure, and I'm sure I got asbestos exposure in the Navy too. So that's probably my chief concern, is whether my lungs will hold out. If I have any side effects from that. So far, I haven't, and thank God for that.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as Agent Orange goes, I really don't see that. I don't think that I had enough exposure to Agent Orange to have any disability because of it.
I only have one final question, and that is, how would you want to be remembered?
As somebody that loved his family and worked for them, showed up every day and did his job. Had a work ethic that I got from my father, and I know I've instilled that in my daughter because she's got a good work ethic too. She's an advisor for the admissions advisor in the graduate school at the University of Texas, Dallas. And she's got a tremendous work ethic, and I'm really proud of her for that. And if we can just impart that to our grandkids, well, I guess that would be it.
Well, Mr. Yant, I'd like to thank you for your service to your country, and I'd like to thank you for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.